Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Can you believe it? We have another tuning guide finally on the channel. I know you guys have waited a long time for it, and I hope that this one doesn't disappoint. As you can tell, we have got the Jaguar XJ220, one of my favourite cars in S-Class, although it is quite a handful to drive. It can be very fast, it's a fantastic all-round car. There are many different types of builds for it, and I have focused for a max handling 6.5 handling build, which is absolutely wonderful around a big variety of tracks, which I'll touch into later. But first, let's have a look at the lap time that we managed to pull off around Indianapolis GP Classic Circuit, and then tuck into how we can build it and how we can tune it. At the end of the video, there will be a little lap guide as well, so please stay tuned for that. But for now, let's have a look at the lap time. So as you can see, we've managed to actually bag ourselves a top 10 time in Europe, which I'm super happy with. It's what I was aiming for, to try and get into the 121s and as deep as possible. Now, I think it is actually capable of going a few tenths faster. However, trying to tie it all together is rather tricky in this car. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a bit of a handful. So do beware. I think you can have a lot of fun in this car, whether you have normal steering or sim steering turned on. You just want to make sure that you're concentrating whilst driving it. How does it compare in terms of the world leaderboard? So it's actually in the top 20, which is a great result. In order to get to the top 12, you'd have to get a low 21, which I don't know. I think I would have to improve on the tune even more, and that would most likely make the car a lot less stable. And I wanted to make sure that the tuning guide that I give out will be for a car that is both fast and stable, that you can run around different tracks. For instance, this can do 201s at Silverstone. It can dip into the 146s at Catalunya. It's really good at Suzuka as well. I've been able to get a 202 in that, but in the right hands it can actually get a 201 around there, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, plenty of tracks where it really can shine, and I think it's a wonderful option to use in multiplayer. So with that said, let's tuck on to the upgrades and the tuning section. So here we can see the car as well as its stats. It's 7.7 speed, 6.5 handling and 9.0 acceleration. This is effectively the most grippiest version of the car that you can build. The handling stat can actually change from 6.5 to 6.6 depending on what engine you put in it. For this one, I've gone with the V12 because, quite frankly, who doesn't love the sound of a V12? That was my sole rationale behind it. But it happens to have worked incredibly well with the car. So there's some of the performance stats. More you can see here is the power is at 582. So basically, this is with the V12 engine and no upgrades, and the lightest chassis possible. So from here, let's have a look at exactly how you can throw this build together. Of course, if you download my tune, then you can basically just unlock the tune from the car and then kind of reverse engineer it that way. But I'll walk you through it right here just for a moment. So as I said, we swap to the 6.0 litre V12 engine, keep it as rear wheel drive. As for the tyres, we just put them onto race. We have only the option to adjust the front tyre width, which we do. We put that to 305. And then as for the rims, can't remember exactly what, but I'm pretty sure it's along the lightest rims. I think so. I'm not too can't quite remember now because it was a little while back when I finished building the car. Here we are. So I've gone for straight lock the windows, but you can go for any others that kind of fit like this same kind of weight. As for other tuning components of the car, we have stock clutch, it's not needed. We've kept stock transmission as well because the race transmission, it just costs too much, and the truth is the stock transmission does actually have an adjustable final drive. So you get everything that you need there. You can vary between having long gear setup or a short gear setup. Both are actually quite viable depending on what kind of track you want to focus the car around. But yeah, you're fine with stock transmission. You have the race driveline. Always make sure you have the race differential. Never want to make that schoolboy error of leaving it out. We have race brakes. The suspension doesn't need an upgrade, but the race weight reduction needs to be included. And as I mentioned, there are no engine upgrades to be made here. All you need to do is focus on the restrictor plate, because I think by default sometimes it can have this here. So just make sure that you have that, and it's the minimum amount of horsepower available with the V12 engine, which is 582. On to the tuning section. So tyre pressure is 2828, pretty standard. Final drive I've put here is 3.50. Now, as I said, you can adjust between having long gears. You can get away with a 4-gear setup on a lot of tracks. For other tracks which involve a lot of medium and slow corners, depending on how much momentum you need to carry around them. So say like around Suzuka, you may prefer to have shorter gears. But for tracks like Indianapolis and Hockenheim, Road America, ones where there's a bit more of like a point and shoot aspect in some regards, then I think going with a 4-gear setup works a lot nicer. You get a lot of pull as well as stability by relying on second gear out of the slow turns. Alignment, we've gone with minus 1.7 camber on the front, minus 1.1 on the rear, 0.0 on the toe, and front caster we've put to 5.5. Initially I was testing at 7, but the truth be told, I was just finding the car too unstable when transitioning from left to right, and it was turning down the caster that ultimately proved to be the most beneficial trait, so best that we went with that. On to the anti-roll bars. We have gone with 40 on the front and 35 on the rear. Gone with a very stiff setup here because the car naturally likes to bobble around. You'll notice it's a bit bouncy. I'm sure anyone who's tried to tune this car before, you have a lot of issues with trying to stabilize the car, whether that's in a straight line or around turns. So we've gone for a stiff setup here, and it helps the car hook up, but at the same time be as reliable as possible when you're trying to commit through fast corners. Springs are relatively stiff as well, so similar issue with like the anti-roll bars. You know, we are trying to overcome that problem of it being very bouncy and unpredictable. So we've gone with 850 on the front, 855 on the rear. You can adjust this. Some setups you might actually want to have softer springs on the rear. Sometimes you want softer on the front. It really comes down to your personal preference around some tracks, but I found this to be a really happy medium. Initially I had springs that are actually at 1,000 front and rear, can you believe it? But I think this works a lot better for certain tracks where the curbs are a bit higher. So this is yeah, that's what we've gone with the springs. And following that logic, we've actually raised the ride height a fair bit. So 5.3 on the front, 5.2 on the rear. And this has allowed us to effectively coast over a lot of bumps, with the car getting less agitated when you're trying to carry speed. But still be careful. I recommend maybe only going halfway on the throttle when going over some curbs. That's like a hot tip for this car. And the same applies for a lot of cars in general too. Onto the damping, so front rebound stiffness is 11.3, rear is 11.5, ever so slightly less on the front than the rear. This is actually just to help the tiniest bit with giving a bit more stability and weight to the rear, which you do find is needed on some of the tighter corners when you're trying to pull out of them. However, for the bump, this is where it gets interesting. So the front bump is, you see, considerably stiffer than the rear. And this is to try and combat some of the snappy oversteer you can sometimes get on initial turning. So when you're trying to brake or you're entering into a corner, this is what happens to be a very tricky area. The car just falls in too fast and then kind of trips over itself. So we've tried to slow this down by raising the front bump stiffness, slowing down the rate in which the car leans down on the front tyres. And on the rear we've kept it as 3.0. I just landed on this number because it seemed to work the best over bumps, so I've really tried to cater this car for handling different road surfaces as well as possible. Onto downforce, 100 on the front, 210 on the rear. By all means, if you feel you need more stability on the car, then just push it all the way up to 228. But I done this for Indianapolis. It just helped the car kind of tuck round the final banking like a bit easier, and that's really key if you're tuning any car for Indianapolis GP. Unless it's like a crazy power speed build, if it's any car that has any remote aspects of grip or handling, it should really be able to handle going flat out. You shouldn't need to let off the throttle at all. And I found that just taking a little bit of downforce off managed this and made it a lot easier. So there we have that. Onto braking force, the balance has been put at 47%. It's kind of like a go-to for me. I'm always between like 48 and 45 on most cars, but that's just a personal preference. You can always bump it up to 49 or 50% if you want more stability whilst you're braking, but I find this quite helpful for trying to trail brake into tricky corners. And the same thing kind of applies to the brake pressure that I have. It's at 140. I know that's a lot lower than what some of you guys might ride. Some of you might be at 150, 160, maybe even 200. So, put it to what feels best for you. But these are the settings that I happen to run with. Finally, we're on to the differential. So acceleration I've put to 80%. It was at 100, but I just found that there's a corner halfway around Indianapolis GP Classic that you'll notice in the replay gets very sketchy, and at 100% I just wasn't able to consistently run through there fast, so I dialed this down to 80%, and it's just helped keep the wheels hold as much traction as possible around some of these slow and medium bends. Deceleration, we've actually put this quite high, but if you've seen my video guide on tuning mid-engine cars, this happens to be the case that I will ramp up the deceleration quite high, because especially if I'm going for a fairly aggressive setup, especially in grip cars, then I use the decel differential to kind of compensate for that. So although the rear end will slide out to get that turn in that I want at corner entry, having the decel this high prevents the car from spinning any more than I want to. It kind of slides, it gets that slip angle, and then eventually you can start straight lining the car halfway through the turn and then focusing on the exit. So that's the tune setup, guys. From now we shall move over onto a little guide of the lap that we set. Okay guys, so here we are coming down to turn 1. We brake just after the black doors that we see on the left hand side, come down into second gear and try and trail brake as much as you can into the inside curve. And here kind of half throttle over turn 2. This will help you ride the curve a lot easier. As we come to the turn 3 and 4, you try and have to modulate the throttle a hell of a lot just to keep the car balanced. As I say, it can be quite tricky to keep the car in line, but once you come into multiplayer races, you'll find it a lot easier when you're trying not to push it to the absolute limit. Here you can see I have a very sketchy moment, and this did actually cost me about a tenth through these 2 turns, so it's a bit of a shame that we didn't get the 21.6 that we was hoping for, but still a great time nonetheless to be sub 22 in a road car. Coming into this long left-hander, you try and brake earlier than what you think you need to. Keep it in third gear and then try and ride over the curve. The curves help carry you around, they help the car rotate, but you have to be careful with your throttle inputs, and the same goes for this curve right here as you come out to the final banking. So you can decide to go between second and third gear through that little complex section, but I ended up settling on third for that particular lap because I was just trying to bring it home and hold it all together. As you can see, the gears are quite long with the 3.5 final drive setting, and the final banking is fairly easy to run through. So yeah, I hope that you seeing the settings here provide a little bit of insight in terms of how to drive the car. As I mentioned, just make sure to experiment with trail braking a fair bit, and also be very patient on the throttle, so gradually increase it when you come out of a lot of turns. When it comes to hairpins though, you can get away with just coming to a complete halt, rotate the car, and then just hammer down the throttle, because the car is quite stable when you're accelerating in a straight line. And I've done the gearing in a way that whenever it launches, it actually goes off the line very, very fast, which is a wonderful trait about this car in particular. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you have, please make sure that you do like it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you can get in touch and receive the latest updates on other tuning guides for Forza Motorsport. I've got plenty that are coming out on the way. I've got a McLaren F1 GT guide coming out for S-Class, which I know you guys have wanted for so long, and I've finally got a setup that I'm happy enough with to share, so watch out for that. If there are other cars that you do want to see on the channel, please comment down below, tell me what cars you want, what tracks you want to see them cars ran on, or even if you just want to share your comments on what you think about this car. So please do download the tune, give it a whirl in multiplayer, try it in hot laps yourself, and let's all help each other get better at tuning, at racing, and ultimately enjoying the game. But for now, thanks for watching guys, and we'll see you in the next video.